These are the notes for scientific inquiry or scientific method. So as I'm going through the notes, you should be filling out the slides that were attached for you. You should type your answers in. And I really think you should be keeping all of your science stuff in one place. So if you're keeping a paper notebook and you have a printer, print these out and put them in your paper notebook. Or if you are using everything online, you should make a folder on your drive just for science class. That way you know where your science notes are at all times and you don't have to search for them. Sometimes if you're trying to study for something, you don't even remember what you have to study. So it's good to keep all of your stuff in one spot for each subject. Okay, so the first page here is scientific inquiry. So a method or methods used to determine an answer or solve a problem. So you want to type in anything you see on my screen that is not on yours. You have lines and you want to fill them in. A good thing to do is to pause the video and type what you need and then unpause when you're ready for the rest. So when you were in 6th grade and learned about the scientific method, many of you learned the saying, "A hippo took a dance class," to remember the order of the scientific method steps. So see if you can remember what A, H, T, A, D, and C stand for. Take a second and see if you can remember those words. The A stands for ask questions, and I always add the word observe or observation in there, and I'll tell you why in a minute. The H stands for hypothesis. T, test your hypothesis. Really, that's the experiment step. A, analyze. D, draw conclusions. And the C, communicate. So the first step, asking questions, it always starts with an observation. So observation, the definition for that is when we use one or more of our senses to gather information. So you have 5 senses. What happens when you use one of them? What happens when you see, smell, or hear something? Usually, you ask a question. So if you would look outside the windows and see a hippo with a grass skirt on and a little flower behind her ear dancing around in a circle, most of you would have some kind of question in your head, like, what the heck is there a hippo doing outside? Or where did that hippo come from? Or is there a zoo nearby? Did they lose their hippo? Is the circus in town? All kinds of questions run through our heads all of the time. So lots of times, that's the first step to any kind of scientific inquiry. Second step is hypothesis. So once you ask that question, or you have a bunch of questions in your head, usually you start to form a hypothesis or an inference or an educated guess about your answer. So your hypothesis is an explanation of an observation. You observed there was a hippo and you're trying to explain it. Your hypothesis can be tested. So lots of times we have answers or thoughts in our heads that we try to use to answer a question. It's only called a hypothesis if you can test it in some way. So if it's an opinion, you can't really test that. Hypothesis can be called a prediction, an inference, or an educated guess. They all sort of mean the same thing. The page numbers, I have one here too. These are the OWL books. So if you have an OWL book at home or you want to take one home, pages NOS 6 is where you will find this information. The third step is when you test your hypothesis. So you made an educated guess about something. It's called a hypothesis if we can test it. So your test is actually the third step. So to test your hypothesis or your prediction, you do an experiment. Your experiment is when you get your data. So when you get numbers about maybe how many hippos have escaped from the zoo in the past week, that would be part of your data. Good experiments are repeatable. So the whole point of science is to figure out answers and solutions. So if you think you have figured an answer out, or you think you have figured out a solution for something, it's only a good answer or a good solution if many other people can repeat your same experiment and get the same results. If they can't repeat it, that means you must have made a mistake somehow. Anybody know who this little guy right here is? He's a scientist. He's a scientist who did an experiment with a kite. And the little key right here, Benjamin Franklin is who that is. He was more than a scientist. He was so many things, but he was also a scientist. Step 4, analyze your results. So to analyze your results, you usually need things like graphs, charts, and tables. Oh my, so many numbers, so many things you can do with them. This is how you sort through and organize your data. Data is usually in the form of numbers, but it could also be in colors. It could be in lots of different things. And usually you need a bunch of different tests to figure out whether you're right or not. So the best way to sort and organize things is how you analyze. Drawing conclusions. Number 5. When you draw conclusions, you make a summary, basically. If I said, what's your conclusion for the density lab? You would need to write a little summary for me. It doesn't have to be long. It'd be a short paragraph, but it would be a summary of the information gathered from testing your hypothesis. So in your density lab, you had a hypothesis that said if an object has a density of greater than 1, it will sink or float. You had to choose sink or float, right? So whenever you make your summary up, you would say, my hypothesis was right. Was your hypothesis right? Or my hypothesis was wrong. And then you would say why. So something like this. My hypothesis for the density lab was right because I said that an object that has a density of greater than 1 will sink. And block number 7, it sunk, and its density was 8. So that's the kind of thing you would say for your summary. The conclusion helps you communicate your data or results to others. So communication is that very last step. I don't have another slide or a number 6 for communicate, but that is the most important step. So that's why you have to have a repeatable experiment, because you need to communicate to other people, other scientists, about what you found out. So if your experiment proved that your hypothesis was wrong, it is not necessarily a bad thing. That is why I said I will never mark your hypothesis wrong unless you leave it blank. So if it's wrong, all you do is make a new one. You make a new hypothesis and you try all over again. This happens a lot in science. Most scientists are wrong many, many, many times before they are right. If your experiment proved your hypothesis right, that's a good thing, but you have to tell other people and they have to repeat it. So yay, you tell others and they try to repeat your experiment to make sure your data and conclusions are correct. If they're correct and they can be proven many, 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 many times, then maybe you can have your repeated experiments and your correct hypothesis lead to a scientific theory or a law. That's like big time. Doesn't happen very often. So a scientific theory It's an explanation of observations, kind of like a hypothesis, only this is based on knowledge that you have gained from many, 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 I should have more than one many there, many observations and investigations. It explains why or how something occurs. So examples are the germ theory and the Big Bang theory. So the germ theory is a long time ago, people didn't know why they got sick. They thought maybe it was some crazy mythical gods that made them sick, or maybe it was because they had like blue or black bile in their bodies. They had strange theories about how they got sick. So when people figured out that germs make you sick, they actually called it the germ theory. And the Big Bang Theory, it's that TV show, right? But at the beginning of the show, if you've ever watched it, for their song that they play at the beginning of the show, they actually tell you what the Big Bang Theory is. It's a theory about how the universe was formed. So both of these things tell why or how something occurs. The germ theory tells how you get sick. There's that word, how, or why you get sick. The Big Bang Theory tells why or how the universe was created. Now, there's a scientific law, and it's a little different. It is not to tell you why or how. Doesn't tell you why or how. It is a rule. A law is a rule. So it describes a repeatable pattern in nature. There is no negotiating with a scientific law. It just is what it is, and there's no why or how. There's no explanation. So examples are gravity, which obviously if you drop something, it's going to fall. Gravity is a law. The law of conservation of matter and mass, and the law of conservation of energy. There's also the 3 laws of motion, which are Newton's laws. You may have heard of those. All kinds of scientific laws that we know of. So they do not explain anything. They don't tell you why or how. They just are. They're rules. They don't change. And that is the end of our scientific method notes. So I suggest that you go back through and watch it again so that you don't have to type in answers, and you can make sure that everything that you just heard, you understand, and save it somewhere so that you don't lose it.